Hi, everyone. Welcome to our NASCAR race rewind here for the Camping World. What was that again, Dan? Camping World
RV
Trailer.
sales the Camping World RV sales 301.
The Camping World RV Sales 301, which turned out to be 305 at New Hampshire Motor Speedway this past weekend. I'm Charlie Turner. The other voice and face on this hangout is Dan Beaver, of course. Hey, Dan, how are you today?
I'm doing great.
All right, so we had another dominant win by Brad Keselowski. This is, I think, the third race since the Michigan race where everybody was asking Keselowski, who finished third in that race, how he was ever going to be able to do anything against the Hendrick motors, and he just kind of slyly said, "I don't know, we'll figure something out." And apparently, he's figured something out because he's won a couple races and been real close to winning three of them.
Yeah, I think they got it. You really never can trust anything a driver says. They're always lobbying for something else.
Yeah.
So I think this is one of those cases.
It was
I think
interesting
Jeff
though.
Gordon.
It was interesting though at that post race presser at Michigan where they asked Keselowski if there was anything that Penske thought they could do or the Ford teams thought the Ford teams could do to catch up with the Chevy engine power from the Hendrick Childress garages, and he said, "No, I think we pretty much got what we've got. We just have to use strategy, and it looks like strategy is just to go faster than everybody else."
Yeah, because that strategy of taking four tires every time he pitted, except for maybe one time near the end, yeah, that took a lot of thought went into that. Not to denigrate Keselowski's or Paul's ability to strategize because they're probably two of the best in the business, but they didn't have to think real hard on Sunday.
No, they just said he had to just get back out on the track. They were the best car on a racetrack for most of the race. We talked a little bit before we went live today, but looked early in the race like maybe Kyle Busch was going to be the guy. But as happened, I guess at Kentucky, um, about a third of the way through the race, then the cream rose to the top. And again, the cream this time was that Penske number two.
Yeah, that's notable also that Kentucky and here Keselowski had by far the dominant car, and Kyle Busch ran second to him. On one hand, that's got to be a little frustrating to run second to a driver that's doing that, and on the other hand, you realize that well you're best in class. I think that probably puts Kyle Busch in a position where, with the right set of circumstances, if in another race like this, he's going to win another once or twice before the chase begins. I think Bush is right on the verge of doing something spectacular.
Yeah, it almost seems like Toyota's going to have to come up with something. I don't know what to gain just a little bit of ground, but they're right there, as you say. They're not. They're certainly not out of it, and it kind of depends on how things go during the race. And not every racetrack is, like a Loudon where you can get that big separation with long green flag runs. And I think you're right. I think Kyle's probably poised to win a couple more races, and I think he's a contender for the chase.
I think
For
he
the
might.
Chase championship, not to make it, but the championship.
Yeah, I think he might be. I think this is finally the type of scenario that benefits him. Anything that takes consistency at all into consideration, and the 10 race chase kind of took consistency into consideration for those 10 races. Bush was never going to win a championship, but with this, where he only has to bust off a good run every 3 weeks or so, this fits in his wheelhouse.
Yeah, well, we should probably get back to talking about this actual race this past weekend, since that's what these race recaps are all about. Let me run down the top five finishers in case anybody who's watching wasn't watching the race or just doesn't remember. Brad Keselowski, of course, as we mentioned, was the winner, followed by Kyle Busch in second place. Kyle Larson, strong third place finish by the rookie. Matt Kenseth, the top five in fourth place, and Ryan Newman. And you called Ryan Newman this past week that he would be strong at Loudon, and he was.
Yeah, he gave me some worrisome moments during the middle. Uh, the entire top 10, you've got Larson in third, you've got Newman in fifth, you've got Tony Stewart in seventh, Stenhouse in ninth. Uh, all of those drivers are not who we've become accustomed lately to seeing up front.
Right.
And you got Denny Hamlin in eighth, and he should be good on short flat tracks. That's been his reputation throughout his career. But disappointing runs at Phoenix and Martinsville earlier this year, you really had to question his ability to find that mojo. If he had not switched strategies as quickly as he did and suffered the same fate as Harvick and Jeff Gordon at the end of the race, where they ran out of gas and ended up finishing outside the top 25, you'd still be having that same question. But he ran incredibly strong throughout the race, and it was an interesting mix in that entire top 10. Also bears noting that the top three were three different manufacturers: Keselowski's Ford, Busch's Toyota, and Larson's Chevrolet. So I don't think you can really say that anybody's completely out of it, although the Fords still seem to be lagging behind as a group, mostly because Roush Fenway's lagging behind some.
Do these flatter tracks kind of even the field out too? Do you feel?
They should. I think they take some of the horsepower away, although you'd be hard-pressed to get someone running second to Keselowski to admit that. You got to roll through the corners a little bit better. You can make up more of it. I think before the race began, I think it was Eric Almirola said, this is a short track, but it feels like you're in those corners for more than half the lap. So you spend a lot of time slowing down and speeding up at the apex of the corners, and that puts the onus back on the driver and a little bit away from the engine tuners, I imagine.
Well, just to run down the second five of that top 10, we had Clint Boyer in sixth place. Another good run by Clint Boyer. He was up there most of the day. As you said, Tony Stewart in seventh, Denny Hamlin eighth, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., probably his best run of the year, in ninth place, and Dale Earnhardt Jr. rounding out the top 10. Another good run for Jr. Several surprises, I thought, in the top 10.
Yes, and some of that was because of the fuel mileage gambles that went awry. Once you pulled Hamlin out of the top 5, Jeff Gordon and Kevin Harvick out of the top 10, it made room for some other drivers. And some drivers who came in and got tires late and what have you. Still, you had Busch and Keselowski dominating the top 5. Denny Hamlin, Joey Logano were the next two drivers. Clint Boyer was in the top 5 for almost half of the race, and nobody else then was in the top 5 for more than 90 laps or so. So you had a couple of drivers that just really dominated and then didn't necessarily get the finish they wanted, and the rest of the field kind of racing to keep up.
I think probably the big news early in the race was Jimmy Johnson going out, finishing 2 laps, I think, and a solid 42nd place finish. Any significance there, or just forget it and take a week off and go to Indy?
I don't think you can completely forget it. They got to figure out what they're doing with tires. He insists that at least the second time they weren't running low air pressures. Goodyear had a different story to tell, and probably the truth lays somewhere in between. They may not have been experimenting or gambling nearly as much as they could have on tire pressures, but it's hard to imagine that he cut 2 left rear tires without something going on. Then that's the 4th, 5th time this year that he's had tire-related problems. Yeah. So
yeah, I mean, that was the issue early in the season when they hadn't won races. He was in position a few times to maybe contend for wins, and they'd blow a tire and they'd be out.
Well, back-to-back flats at Bristol and Auto Club, another flat at Richmond, some crash damage that I've got noted, but I don't always note the reason for the crash damage, so some of those could be tire-related as well. So they're doing something. They're experimenting with something that is very risky. Of course, he's got 3 wins, so when it is working, it's working well. That they don't care about where they are on the points. They don't care about finishing 42nd right now. But you got to worry.
I mean, this is the time they've got the luxury of being able to do something like that if they're trying to try some setups or whatever.
Yeah, they could almost finish 42nd in the next 7 races before the chase begins, and they've got a good enough position in the points that wouldn't completely kill themselves. and if they can find it. Before they had those two back-to-back problems at Daytona and New Hampshire, he was coming off a 7-race top 10 streak, so can't really fault him too much. Although, from a fantasy standpoint, which is 75% of what I do, sure makes them scary.
Yeah, I would think so. I would think so. You used to be, Mr. Reliable. You could, especially at certain racetracks, but if they are a bit up and down this year. One of the other stories of the weekend. Any significance to the Morgan Shepherd controversy? How do you feel about it? Is Shepherd too old to be racing with these guys?
No. If any driver who can get in the car and make laps at NASCAR's minimum speed probably should be allowed to race. I think it might have called into question exactly what the minimum speed should have been on this track. I don't know what. I know it's a formula off of the fastest laps run. I don't know what the formula is and whether or not the formula changes from track to track. If it doesn't, it should. I think obviously Shepherd was going too slow, and going too slow still couldn't control the car. That begs the question of whether or not his reflexes may have slowed down some. But if he can race at a minimum speed and keep his car under control, I don't think age is the question. I think it's the ability of the car, or the speed in the car, and the ability of the driver that should be called into question. And at some point, I think we've all got to realize that we're probably a step or two behind where we used to be.
Yeah.
Is Shepherd? Probably. Should that mean that no 72-year-old driver should race? Probably not.
Yeah, I think it's. It's a story, and it was apparently kind of a slow news weekend for it to be as big as it got, I guess. But I don't think we'll hear about it again. And I don't think NASCAR would have any problem at all of telling him, it's time to sit down if that's what was necessary. So
if they thought he was a danger, and the stories change from time to time too. Last year a lot of people were up in arms about start and park drivers.
Right.
You can't field an entry that's going to compete with the Penske's, the Hendricks, etc., on the amount of money that these teams have. So they either have to start and park, or they have to run slowly. And you have to pick which you're going to get annoyed about. Or you're going to have a small field.
Right.
And then that becomes a different story. And fans get annoyed about that as well. So you got to realize that there are consequences to everything that you complain about. Pick which it is that you actually want to go to the barricades over, and make that your cause celeb.
Well, I guess to sign out here, maybe we should talk a little bit about Jeff Gordon's comment about Brad Keselowski, since we talked about that a little bit before the show as well. Anything there? Anything that will linger through the break? I'll put it that way.
No, and I doubt there's any animosity on either end. I think Keselowski probably. You say things with a little lilt to your voice, a little lightheartedly, that don't always make it into print that same way. Saying that a driver is full of what he said Keselowski was full of could be fighting words down here in Texas.
Right.
Unless you know the guy really well and you punch him playfully in the shoulder after you say it. So I think that's probably what Jeff was saying. However, the Fords do seem to have an overall disadvantage, and Keselowski is playing that for everything he can. The reason the Fords seem to have an overall disadvantage is probably because Roush Fenway is struggling, not because there's any problem with Ford. But if Keselowski can get a few things out of that, can lobby NASCAR for a little bit of something, he's going to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what it's all about. I think there's definitely an agenda behind those comments both ways, from Keselowski and from Gordon. So we'll see how it plays out. We've got 10 days before our next Sprint Cup race. It'll be the Brickyard 400. We'll talk about that one after it's over, and you can join Dan and I along with Steve Rockwitz, Beth Ann Heisler on our NASCAR hangout on Pit Row as well, and then Dan and I are going to still talk some fantasy racing between now and then. So thanks for joining us today, Dan. Always good stuff. Really appreciate it. Appreciate your time and your your expertise when it comes to these things, and always get some good insight from this. He's Dan Beaver. You can follow him on Twitter at Fantasy Race. Follow me on Twitter at On Pit Row. I'm Charlie Turner, and we're signing off our NASCAR Race Rewind for the New Hampshire race, the first New Hampshire race this year, and we'll talk to you again next time. Thanks, folks.